How's everybody doing? I can't hear anything out of that. All righty. Would y'all join us in worship? I count on one thing. Same God that never fails will not fail me now. You won't fail me now in the waiting. Same God who's never late is working all things out. Working all things out. Oh yes, I will lift you high in the lowest valley. Yes, I will bless your name. Oh yes, I will sing for joy when my heart is heavy all my days. Oh yes, I will. I count on one thing. The same God that never fails will not fail me now. You won't fail me now in the waiting. The same God who's never late is working all things out. You're working all things out. Oh yes, I will lift you high in the lowest valley. Yes, I will bless your name. Oh yes, I will sing for joy when my heart is heavy all my days. Oh yes, I will for all my days. Oh yes, I will, and I choose to pray, to glorify the name of all names, and nothing can stand against. And I choose to pray, to glorify the name of all names, and nothing can stand against. Oh yes, I will lift you high in the lowest valley. Yes, I will bless your name. Oh yes, I will sing for joy when my heart is heavy all my days. Oh yes, I will for all my days. Oh yes, I will for all my days. Yes, I will. Grace, what have you done? Murdered for me on that cross, accused in absence of wrong. My sin washed away in your blood. Too much to make sense of it all. I know that your love breaks my fall. The scandal of grace, he died in my place. So my soul Your power is as dead as my sin. The cross has taught me to live. In mercy, my heart now to sing. The day and its troubles shall come. I know that your strength is enough. The scandal of grace, you died in my place, so my soul will live. Oh, to be like you, give all I have just to know you. Jesus, there's no one beside you. Forever to hope in my heart. To be like you. Oh, to be like you. I give all I have just to know you. Jesus, there's no one beside you. Forever to hope in my heart. And it's all because of you, Jesus. It's all because of you, Jesus. It's all because of your love that my soul will live. To be like you, I give all I have just to know you. Jesus, there's no one beside you. Forever the hope in my heart.
With the King of my
Dear Lord, I just want to thank you for letting us come here and just be able to not have to worry about anything else and just only focus on you, Lord, and just find comfort in knowing you're there and finding peace in the middle of a storm, Lord. I thank you for everything you've done and will continue to do for us, Lord, and I just pray that we can hear and accept what you have for us tonight, Lord, and just thank you for always looking out for us and watching over us. It's in your holy precious Son's name. Amen.
Well, thank you guys. It's really good. Isn't it exciting? We got, if you can move that, that'd be great. We got a full band up here now. Not to say that what Mr. Shane did here in the past is, but I love having a full band. It's great. Well, I hope you guys are surviving the cold weather. I don't know about you, but I'm not used to the cold weather anymore. I used to be used to the cold weather. When I lived in New Mexico, the first year I moved to Texas, I wore shorts like year round. It was so nice. It was amazing. But now that I moved down to South Texas, I don't even know if I remember what snow looks like anymore. So in Beeville, they used to talk about the time that it snowed, not like that year, like the single time in like 12 years that it had snow. So I'm looking forward to it. I wish we could go back to the old days too of like where, I remember there's nothing better than sitting the night before a big snowstorm and watching the news and then watching that little tiny thing across the bottom of the news that was listing schools, right? Like you're just waiting for it. Come on, right? It was always the best, right? I wish we could go back to that, but anyways, one of the things I always loved to do when it came to snow days and things like that was I loved to go sledding. We used to have, in New Mexico, we had these really nice hills, and so we would take sleds and different things, and I always remember the effort. That was, for some reason, the thing that sticks in my mind the most, the effort of trying to climb up the hill and getting to the top of the hill. I remember one time as like a smaller child, I was carrying this heavier sleigh. It was like a 2-person sleigh, and I'm shrugging up the hill, trying to get to the very top of the mountain. I get to the very top of the mountain, and I slip. And I let go of the sled to put my hand down to catch myself. And guess what the sled does? All the way back down the mountain, right? Like all my effort wasted. And so tonight I'm going to talk about the idea of slippery slopes, okay? We're getting to the very end of Gideon's story in chapter 8 here. And it's kind of like that in life sometimes. It can feel like, hey, we're trying to get to a certain point, or we're trying to work ourselves up to a certain point, or try to do that in a job or something like that. And it can feel like we get to there, and then all of a sudden we just make a mistake and we're back down to ground zero. And I think with Gideon, we kind of get this amazing story, right? Like we think of Gideon as just a hero of the Bible and someone that we can look forward to or we can look towards as a hero. And you know what's just universal about all these guys, right? They all make mistakes. And so tonight we're going to look at Gideon's kind of like final slip, like his last thing. Just like I told you at the beginning of this study of the book of Judges, like all these stories in the book of Judges are pointing out one thing. That even like the best of us, even to the best of our abilities, even through our best efforts, everything that we could possibly try to do is like climbing that hill and then sliding down. Like, because there's just nothing that we can do without Jesus to get over that. This book of Judges just highlights that. And so we're going to get to highlight that again tonight in the end of Gideon's story here. So we're going to be in the end here in Judges chapter 8. So if you'll follow along with me as we go through this, I'm going to read the first 2 verses here in 22. It says, the Israelites said to Gideon, rule over us, you, your son, and your grandson, because you have saved us from the hand of the Midian. But Gideon told them, I will not rule over you, nor my son will rule over you. The Lord will rule over you. So again, the people don't necessarily directly ask for him to be their king, but everything that they ask for has the elements of a king here, right? 1, rule over us, lead us. 2, hey, we're going to do you, your son, and then your grandson. So kind of like a royal dynasty that you would kind of set up here, make a dynasty of leaders. And then also he's a warrior leader. Like the reason why he's chosen, right, is like, hey, you were kind of this military success. We want you to lead us. And so the people, they should know better than this at this point, right? Like they've witnessed God do some amazing things. And even in the book of Judges, when you go and look through it, like God makes it clear that he's the one who's going to save Israel over and over. Actually, 6 times God says he's going to save Israel. But still, for some reason, the people are like, Gideon saved us. He's the one that did it, right? And so luckily, Gideon does have one more moment here of success, I would say, before he falls off the slope here. And he does direct them. He says, actually, I'm not going to rule over you. I'm not going to rule over you. The Lord should rule over you. And he actually uses the term here, Yahweh, as in the one true God is going to rule over you. So he's redirecting like he should. But there's a problem here, right? Like they immediately have put him into this place of a king. And so there's something that we need to be aware of when it comes to just living a life. And that's elevating or exalting people to positions that only God should be. And we do this all the time, right? Like they didn't need a king. They already had God. They didn't need a royal dynasty. They already had these judges. They didn't need a warrior because God had already given them the strength. Now, before you fault them too much, do we not do the same thing with people in today's society? We create levels of people, right? Like if someone famous were to walk through the door right now, right? Like you may stop paying attention to me, right? Like we're going to pay attention to whoever's famous, an actor or a musician or an athlete. One of my favorite things ever, the story that I love the most, or not completely all the way, but my wife and I were big sports fans, and she's a big Giants fan, or was a big Giants fan. It's hard to be a Giants fan today. But she was a Giants fan, and I was a Cowboys fan, and so there's always 2 games a year that was like, rough at our house because of the NFL schedule. I'll never forget one time, me and my dad have always gone to games, and one time we were going to go to a Giants game, so I was going to bring Kelsey along with us. And to understand my wife's fandom, she was a fan of the Giants because of one individual who played. His name was Eli Manning. Okay, like she liked Eli Manning. I don't know why she liked Eli Manning, but I remember we first got into the football stadium, and we're at Cowboys Stadium, the giant, just huge, 100,000 people in the stadium, and we finally sit in our seats, and we're up high, kind of in the 4th, section up there, and she looks over to me, and she goes, Jeremy, I go, what? She's like, I'm in the same room as Eli Manning. I was like, yes, this giant stadium, right? But we elevate certain people like that, we do that with musicians or leaders, and we even do it sometimes with spiritual leaders, and we shouldn't do that. We hold pastors or evangelists to certain levels of like this, like they're the one that saved me or they're the one that did that. And that's not reality. I remember growing up, I used to feel that way about the pastors at my church. It was like, oh, these guys are just like perfect. Like they never sin. Like they're like amazing people. And I remember when I went to college, I was playing basketball with a youth pastor that I was starting to serve under, and he cursed. And my whole world was like, what just happened? It was like in my brain, it was like, did Jesus just curse? Like that's where I was at that level. And it's very dangerous to do that when we exalt people to positions that they shouldn't be, because we're exalting sinful people, right? And we should never do that. Think of how many people have lost their trust in Jesus because of a leader, right? Or they've failed to come to church because of a failed pastor, or they've put their hope in someone who is, by definition, a sinner and is going to make mistakes. And so we have to be careful with that, to elevate a person to a position that only God can be. And that's what these people are doing. And so this is kind of the tip of the mountain here. Gideon does say, hey, don't follow me, or like you shouldn't do this, like it should be for God. But then everything else is kind of downhill from here. So let's see what happens here in the next couple of verses. Verse 24, and he said, I do have one request, that each of you give me an earring from your share of the plunder. It was the custom of the Ishmaelites to wear gold earrings. They answered, we'll be glad to give them. So they spread out a garment, and each of them threw a ring from his plunder onto it. The weight of the gold rings he asked for came to 1,700 shekels, not counting the ornaments, the pendants, and the purple garments worn by the king of Midian, or the chains on the camels' necks. So Gideon says, he gives words to say, hey, I don't want to be the king, but then turns around and the spoils are just too tempting, right? Which is interesting because he's not the first leader to have actually rejected spoils. Abraham does this. In Genesis 14, we see that he rejects them the same way. Abraham in Genesis 14 says that I will not accept anything belonging to you, not even a thread or a strap of a sandal, so you will never be able to say, I made Abraham rich. So Gideon had examples from his history of not doing this, but it's just too tempting for him. He's like, let's take up a little donation for my cause here, right? And so what's he requests? He requests the earrings as his plunder. And they don't hesitate at all. They lay out a garment and they throw the earrings on there, but they also throw all kinds of other royalty things on there. Purple, garments and pendants and camels, things chains around the camels' necks and all kinds of different things here. They throw them on there. Even though, just the rings, they calculate basically that from this amount of shekels, historians believe it would have been about 42 pounds of gold that they collect. In today's prices, that's about $1 million worth of gold just from earrings. And that's not including all the other things that they give him. So Gideon is now a very wealthy man just by this one request. But it's a slippery slope, right? It's a slippery slope when we make ourselves the king of our lives. And that's what Gideon does here. He, by words, denies wanting to be the ruler, right? He, by his words, points to them and says, oh no, I don't want to do this, God should lead you. But his actions tell a completely different story. His actions show the true desire of his heart there to be the king. On the outside, we can do the same thing. We can claim certain things. We can say, yes, God is God, or yes, he is the King of Kings, or he is the Lord of Lords. And we can say those things, but we have to check, or is that how we're truly behaving? Do we behave that way, or does the inside tell a different story? And that's exactly what happens with Gideon here, right? He, on the outside, knows all the theology, all the things he's supposed to say. Hey, no, I'm not supposed to lead you. God is supposed to lead you. But I'm going to take all those things of a king, right? And we do that in different ways in our own lives. Like we tell a different story with our families, maybe, or our time, or we take different things in our behaviors and we say, well, actually, I say this one thing, but I'm really in charge of my life. And that's a real challenge to think about, hey, do I not only proclaim Christ and what should be, but do I actually back it up with my actions? Who really is the king of my life? Do I say he's the king, or do I still pretend to be the king and take all of the things that come with kingship, right? And then here in verse 27, what does he do with all this? Gideon made the golden tin ephod, which he placed in Ophrah, his town. All Israel prostituted themselves by worshiping it there, and it became a snare to Gideon and his family. So what does he do? He makes an ephod. I didn't know what an ephod was till today. I did till I started studying this. And it's kind of an interesting thing. It's really just a shirt-like garment. It was kind of a fancy apron to say would be really dumbing it down. But what it was used for was it was specifically worn by the high priests. And we read about this in Exodus 28, where it talks about making it of purple and scarlet yarn, and it had gold to it, and attached to it was the breastplate. And on the breastplate, there were 12 stones that represented all the tribes of Israel. And inside that breastplate, attached to the ephod, were these 2 stones, too, that were kind of used for discerning things. So there were these precious stones that the high priest would use as kind of a way to communicate with God. Back then. And the Bible is not really clear on how it works, whether it was casting lots or something about it that was special about how they worked. It was kind of how God communicated to them. Even more so in David, later in Scripture, will actually request for an ephod for information of wanting to know what God's will is. But here's the problem, right? Gideon was never asked to make an ephod by God. He wasn't. The real one still existed in Shiloh. And so what he does is what he's really attempting is to kind of circumnavigate worship here, or circumnavigate what should be happening. God never asked him to do this. Some people are they read this and they're like, oh, well, what he's trying to do is he's trying to reestablish worship and he's trying to make it better or whatever. But when you read kind of what happens from it, you can clearly see if this wasn't ever in God's plan, because the results of it are disastrous, completely disastrous, right? It takes that much for all of a sudden Israel now to have a new idol to worship. It's this golden ephod that he makes, right? Like it's just, and the Bible uses some pretty harsh terminology here, prostituting themselves. Like I can't think of a worse way to describe it. Like full commitment here of what it is. And then not only on top of it does it cause everyone to worship, but it also says that it's a snare to his family. Like it's going to be not just a stumbling block, but something that traps his family, causes pain and destruction along the way. So another kind of slippery slope I think we have to be aware of in Gideon's story here is we can't just do things and not consider our actions, right? We can't just, like it's kind of the other side of that exalting coin, right? Like we don't want to exalt people to levels of where we're paying attention to them more, but we also want to be careful in how we live, that we are still examples in how we're supposed to live. And our tendency sometimes can be like, well, it doesn't matter how I live. Like, they should just follow God, right? Like, that's what they should do. But we have to be aware that the things we do can cause generations and can cause pain. Like, I always used to tell my youth group back home, like, hey, someone's always watching you. Like, there's younger students that watch you. And how you act kind of can create a culture of our youth group. Like, if you act one way, the younger kids will watch that, and they'll do the same thing. The same thing goes with us as adults, and not only that, in our families, but you see how this goes on and on and on. And again, you can think of the consequences that so many people have, like, I don't care how I live. Like it doesn't matter what I do. And how many people have been hurt by that? How many times someone who was supposed to represent faith in their life or belief, or they were a Christian, or they claimed they were a Christian, and then someone who was a non-believer watched that person, and they're like, well, why would I ever want to be a part of that if that's how that person lives? Why would I ever want to participate in anything that person believes if that's how they behave? So we have to be careful, right? There's the two sides of the coin there. We don't want to exalt people, but we also have to be careful here not to create things that are going to cause problems later down the line. Then in verses 28, 29 through 31, it says this: Thus Midian was subdued before the Israelites and did not have to raise its head again. During Gideon's lifetime, the land had peace for 40 years. Jerubbaal, son of Joshash, went back home to live. He had 70 sons of his own, for he had many wives. His concubine who lived in Shechem also bore him a son he named Abimelech. Right, so it seems like God here is at least faithful even in all the disaster that's happening by Gideon already. Like, he still takes care of the Midianites like he promised through Gideon. God is faithful to cleaning that up, right? It says they don't even have to lift their heads. It's like, the idea is like, I don't have to put my head on a swivel. Like, I don't have to look around for the Midianites to attack anymore because they're subdued. And they have 40 years of peace, an entire generation that they get this benefit here. But again, Gideon's already making more mistakes, right? Like, I had heard of other people in the Bible having multiple wives, but I hadn't ever heard or had thought that Gideon had multiple wives too. And we know this is, again, something that God never prescribed in the Bible. You can read about it in Leviticus, where it says, he shall not acquire many wives for himself, lest his heart turn away, nor shall he acquire for himself excessive silver and gold. So there's even a command about this, and Gideon's already breaking two of them right there. And so he gets all these wives, and he kind of has this harem here of 70 wives. We don't know how many wives, but these wives give him 70 sons, which is so many sons, and no telling how many daughters on top of this, like so many children. I can't even imagine how much it would have cost him just to provide for this. Like, it's tough to provide for one child today, right? Let alone 70 plus of them. And so Gideon had committed this sin here of polygamy because it was kind of tolerated, and it was what other kings did. Disaster results in this, right? On top of all of these wives he also has in another town a concubine, right? A prostitute, essentially. And with that, the only son's name we get listed here is that son, right? He's mentioned. So in another town, he has another relationship with someone, and he gets to name him. You know, and naming kids is fun. It was one of the things that I really enjoyed about, having kids was naming them. I like to have names that have meaning to them. Like Logan, one of my twins, his name is my father-in-law's hometown. And so we kind of wanted to honor my father-in-law, so it was Logan, West Virginia, so we named him Logan. I like meanings by that. Addie, my only daughter that I got in the crew, her name means kind because I wanted people to experience her and leave feeling better about themselves. I wanted her to be kind. But naming back then even had more meaning, right? Like your name had significance and they thought about it. And so his name, Abimelech, that Gideon would have given him, means Abba, which is father, and Melech means king. So what he's really saying is, my father is the king. Now I feel like we've gone full circle here, right? Like from the beginning of this chapter where he's like, hey, no, I don't want to rule. I don't want to be the guy, like God's supposed to rule over you, to now naming your son so that future generations will know, yeah, that's my dad's the king, right? Like he's full on taking the title now of king here, even through his offspring. Now, there's danger, right? Like the other slippery slope that I think is probably the most subtle of all of them has to just be pride, right? Like we don't catch pride right away, but it can kind of slowly build. I think of Proverbs 16:18 that says, pride goes before destruction, a haughty spirit before the fall. I remember when I was in college, I went to play the drums, and I was in the marching band in high school, and I loved playing the drums. So one of the things that I wanted to do when I went to Howard Payne was play the drums. So I got the opportunity. It's a smaller school, but when I came in, man, I was prideful about my abilities. I'll tell you right now. Like in high school, I was like the best drummer in my little tiny Bloomfield High School in Northwest New Mexico, and so I had that pride. And I remember I played the tenor drums, which are 4 toms, kind of like that in there. And I remember telling one of the older students, like, oh yeah, in high school, I played this and I was so good. And one thing about college students, they really don't care about what you do in high school. And I found that out pretty quickly, right? And so he called my bluff. He's like, all right, come on over here in the middle of a football game playing in the stands. And I go up there and it was a disaster, like just complete disaster. I even so much so that I got I don't know how it happened, but somehow I got so nervous that I accidentally kicked the drum stand that holds the drum and almost toppled all the drums over. I made a fool of myself. But how often do we do that, right? When it comes to pride, it's so subtle. We think something, and then before we know it, we're completely blind by it. And I think the same thing happens to Gideon here in the end, right? He has denied his desires or his kingship, and now he's just full on I'm the king. Even the next generation will know I'm the king. And it's such a contrast to who Christ is, right? Christ is humble. He didn't have to do anything that Gideon did here, right? He didn't have to demand to be the king because he was the king, right? He didn't have to move the place of worship because he was central to that. He didn't have to rule over nations. It says that he came to serve, not to be served, right? He lived differently. But Gideon is doing all that stuff, that slippery slope stuff, again, of what happens at the end of his story here. So look at the last part here with me. In verses 32 through 35, Gideon, son of Joash, died at a good old age and was buried in the tomb of his father Joash in Ophrah of the Ezrahites. No sooner had Gideon died than the Israelites again prostituted themselves to the Baals. They set up Baal-Berneth as their god and did not remember their Lord their God, who had rescued them from the hands of all the enemies on every side. They also failed to show any loyalty to the family of Jerubbaal, that is Gideon, in spite of all the good things he had done for them. So it's okay, well, Gideon lives a long life. God at least blesses him there. He's buried in honor at his family's, tomb here of his father. But man, don't you hate it when you get to the end of a movie and it's just a terrible movie? The ending just ruins it all. Again, the book of Judges is pointing out that these people can't do it. They've elevated, again, a person. And so my last thing to think about tonight is that, are we just seeking the praise of people? And I think we see this in 2 ways. One, I think we see it the way that people praised Gideon. Even though he clearly was making some mistakes, something with the people led them to be like, well, the minute that Gideon dies, they turn back. And I can only think, like, why would you turn so quickly from something when someone else dies? The only thing I can wonder is, like, how much faith did they have in Gideon as opposed to God? When Gideon was gone, it's like, oh, don't know what to do now. I guess we got to go back to here. How much of their foundations were dependent on him? How much, like, was their spiritual growth wrapped up in this one man? And when they were gone, they were instantly lost and didn't know what to do. And that's not hard to see that we do the same thing. Do we not do the same thing when it comes to spiritual growth? Sometimes it's, the only time I work on my spiritual growth is in the sanctuary when someone's talking. Or sometimes I only work on my spiritual growth when I'm in a Bible study or maybe at life group. Like, we become dependent on other people instead of taking it on ourselves. When I'm not in church, guess what? My spiritual growth is gone. And so we have to be careful about that, to either put people or certain things like that on this element of where they're so crucial to our faith growing that when they're gone, we can't grow anymore. And then two, it's also interesting to me to think from Gideon's perspective, right? It says he failed to show any loyalty to his family. So all that he had done in his kingship is gone. Right? Like all of this wealth, all of these wives, all of his family, all of these things that just says they forget to show any loyalty to him. And it's humbling, right? To think about how much we can seek the praise of people and how fleeting that can be. Right? I think about, the Cowboys are done with winning now, so forever, it seems like. And so one of the things that always amazes me is the day after they lose and they're in the playoffs, you know what the immediate talk is? It's like about the draft. Got to talk about the NFL draft. And like people are already predicting who the Cowboys are going to pick for the NFL draft and all these things. But the thing that amazes me when you watch those NFL drafts is you see these teams and they have all these needs, right? They'll say like so-and-so, like the Giants are on the clock and they need a quarterback and they need an offensive lineman and they need a linebacker. And I always have been wondering, what if you're the quarterback of that team? Like currently, like, and you see on that sign like, oh, we need a quarterback. It's like, what about me? Like I'm the quarterback right now. And I think about that because it just goes to show like, even in a sport, like you're good or you're bad, and what you can do for me is so fleeting, right? It's so quick. Like the average, it says for the NFL player is like 3 years and you're done. Like, and I think about that all the time because it's like, how many things in my life have I sought this like desire or this praise from people, or this praise from I've worked towards people thinking I'm awesome, or people thinking I'm good, or people, whatever I might be adding to my life, and how quickly that fails. And I think that you see this in Gideon's story here at the very end. All those things that he tried to do, bringing the ephod, doing all these different things, they fail. They fail him at the end. So I think it's so important, whatever we do, one of the biggest slippery slopes we do, whatever we do, we have to realize, am I seeking the praise of people, or am I seeking the praise of God? Am I trying to find God's will for my life, or am I following riches and fames and things that the Bible say will be destroyed by moths and rust? So do I seek eternal rewards, or am I just seeking these kind of temporary things that eventually will go away? And so we see, again, the cycle happen. We've completed another cycle with Gideon, right? And the people need something better. They need a Savior. They can't rely on a person, an individual. They need Christ to come. They need something better than what's here. And we see the cycle again here in Judges. And so we get to talk about that more as we continue looking through this book. Let's pray. Dear God, thank you so much for tonight. Just thank you for the opportunity to look at this last part of Gideon's story. God, I pray that you would just be with us in our pride and different things that we might struggle with, that we would only seek what you have to say, that we would look after you like you're our audience of one, God, that we don't need praises or riches or whatever we might be chasing after, God, that we only need to seek after you. God, thank you for all that you do. God, I pray that you would keep us safe in the days to come with the winter storm and everything that's coming up, God. And God, I just pray that you continue to lead us in all things. God, thank you for all you do, and we pray this in your name. Amen.